Hello, good morning or good afternoon, depending on your time zone. My name is Robert Schoenberger, and I'm editor-in-chief of IndustryWeek. And welcome to Production Pulse, our bi-weekly live stream where we talk about issues important to the manufacturing world. And today we're going to be discussing electricity and the country's rapidly growing demand for electricity and how that's affecting the manufacturing world. We've had some changes in our lineup from the announcements that we made earlier in the week, but I'd like to introduce our panel. We have Nikki Chandler, who is editorial director of the Transmission and Distribution Group here at Endeavor Business Media, which includes a lot of different titles that she can go over when we get over to talking to her. We have Sara Jensen, who is with our Power and Motion brand, which deals with a lot of power transmission into tools and equipment and hydraulics, pneumatics, and electrically driven items. And we have Matt Vincent, who is editor-in-chief of Data Center Frontier. And we have a last-minute addition here. We have Chris Butler with Flex, and I reached out to Flex because just this morning they announced a big investment in Dallas, Texas, to make switchgear for their for the electrical grid and for power users. So welcome everyone. Oh, and looks like we just lost someone briefly, but we'll get Sarah back shortly. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And as I mentioned at the start, the country is really hungry for power right now. We had several years of sort of flat electrical use as people, energy efficiency programs took place nationwide, and appliances got more efficient, plants got more efficient, lighting improved. But then in the past few years, we've had this growth of AI, which drives data centers. We've had electric vehicles. We've had a lot of other components coming in that are now driving this increased demand for electricity, and that's driving some manufacturing moves. And let's just turn it right over to Chris to start. And maybe, Chris, if you can tell us a little bit about what Flex announced this morning and why it was so necessary for you guys to invest in Dallas. Chris, I'm sorry, we're not getting your audio here. We just got you there, so if you could.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. First of all, thanks for inviting me. I know it was a little last minute, but we do have some exciting news about some investments that we're making in Dallas. And really, if you just step back a second and you start looking about what's going on in the data centers today, the use of GPUs rising, right, in the data center is really having a significant impact on the consumption of power. And people can't keep up. It doesn't matter how you do the math. When you look at the increase in GPU utilization, we expect to see somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 times the amount of energy consumption in a data center in the future. And with that, we have customers that are really in need of additional capacity. So here in the US, we've been making a number of investments. One notable one was back in November. We had bought a company called Crown Technical Systems. What Crown does is they build what we like to call power pods. And what a power pod is we take all of the electrical equipment that's required for a data center and we put it all into one building. This has a number of key benefits for our customers, but most namely, it helps them keep on schedule, right? It's been a real struggle getting enough labor to even build these data centers. And we're able to do that in a controlled environment and then ship it to our customer site. It's actually that acquisition was the reason why we invested in Dallas. Crown had a small facility in the Dallas market. We are expanding it like crazy. So we just announced that we're opening a 400,000 square foot site. This site is going to be where we produce power pods. So this will be a significant expansion of our manufacturing footprint here in the US for not only power pods, but also all the equipment that goes inside. So things like low voltage switchgear, medium voltage switchgear, busway. This will be a one-stop shop for our data center customers, and it's sitting right in the middle of the country. So it's really easy to take these huge buildings and ship them kind of wherever they need to go.
Right. Thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, the timing of this, we already had this conversation scheduled. I saw that release this morning about this big investment in Dallas. We've also been talking about Eaton Corp. Just last week announced a big plant investment in South Carolina. Schneider Electric has been spending money. Just this need to update the grid, modernize the grid, have more power flowing through it, not just because of an aging grid, but because of this increased demand is really driving a lot of change in these markets right now. So. Yeah. And with that, let me turn it over to you, Nikki, because you're the one who deals with a lot of that with your knowledge and your focus on the utility world. You talk a little bit about what's been driving some of the, we mentioned data centers. What else is driving this growth of power demand in the U.S.?
Well, it's data centers. That's the big story, the big news that we've been hearing, but also the onshoring of manufacturing. And of course, we've all been watching the chaos that's been happening in the last couple of weeks of tariffs, maybe happening, maybe not. But even with all of that, you're kind of seeing in the future that, there's, even with the Biden administration, there was kind of that emphasis on getting some of that manufacturing back to the U.S. to really actually solidify and guarantee that supply chain for all of the things that we need for power, which would be the transformers, the switchgear, all the components of the substations all the way to the meter. So that's definitely another big factor. We saw a big shift when right after COVID, when everybody went to work from home. And so utilities were trying to deal with, where is that load at? And so now it's the news story. We kind of know maybe where some of that loads are coming from, but it's how are we going to meet that? And then the other big one, of course, is the electrification and all of the electrification of everything, not just EVs, which may be slowing down a little bit, but it's still going. But electrification of everything in your house. So those are the big drivers for more need for capacity.
All right, great. Yeah, we've written a lot about the data center side of things, just because so much is on the cloud, so much is AI driven these days, and as Chris mentioned, the GPUs, the graphics processing units, the NVIDIA chips, use a lot of power, especially when you string them together in these big arrays. Matt, let's if you could maybe address that a little bit from the data center frontier point of view. You write a lot about data centers.
Yeah.
How are data centers dealing with this need for more power?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Robert, for including me in this discussion today. Yeah, I mean, we can't talk about data centers these days without talking about AI, as you note. And I just wanted to hit you with a couple of data points on the power side. To echo sort of what Nikki was talking about, just in 2025, the global data center industry is expected to initiate 10 gigawatts of new capacity across globally across the hyperscale and co-location segments. So 10 gigawatts is a lot in just a year. And, with the data center industry expansion that's undergoing right now, it's AI's impact on power demand is just really putting the charts into that hockey stick mode at our data center event, Data Center Frontier Trends Summit last September. It was almost like a running joke talking about that hockey stick chart, that's going off the top of the graph. Goldman Sachs research estimates that AI could lead to a 160% increase in data center power consumption, adding approximately 200 terawatt hours by 2030. So if you believe what Goldman Sachs says, that's reflective of other numbers that we've seen in the industry. And then, Robert, I know you wanted to talk about what's going on in terms of the building of data centers that's going to be sucking up all this power globally and on these shores. So I wanted to hit you with a couple more data points. In terms of 2025 CapEx projections for the four big hyperscalers, we find that Amazon, in their Q1 announcements, Amazon is projecting $100 billion in CapEx, up from $83 billion in 2024. Microsoft, $80 billion, up from $55 billion. This is just in hyperscale data center building. Google 75 billion, up from 52.5 billion last year, and Meta 65 billion, an increase from 39 billion in capex for last year. And all this is in addition to 100 billion in projected 2025 AI spend by the new Stargate project that you might have heard of, that was announced a couple of weeks ago, happening down there in Texas, that the federal government is involved in. So that all adds up to a high confidence in the future of AI for the hyperscale sector. And then the last thing I wanted to hit you with, addressing the building of data centers in this country, with with regard to what's happening with the power and electrification, and of course we're also here to talk about the manufacturing. According to JLL, U.S. data center construction has increased more than 7-fold in the last 2 years, with occupancy growing at a 30% CAGR since 2020. And lastly, the North American data center construction market, which was valued at 89 billion in 2022, is projected to reach 165 billion and change by 2030, growing at a CAGR of 8.1%. So these numbers are all just sort of indicative of the real surge in the growth of data centers and the construction of them, and what it'll mean for power. So I don't want to rattle on and on here for too long, but definitely happy
that's
to
great.
take part in
Thank you so much for all that, Matt. Chris, you had a comment you wanted to make about power quality and some of the impact this has had.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. And Matt, the statistics, every time I look at them, it really surprises me, right? And I was with the customer the other day, and they said they were going to buy enough generators this calendar year to power the entire city of Chicago.
Yeah.
And that we're going to be deploying them across their data centers. So there's a ton of investment going on. But there's a lot of challenges too. As we are bringing all of these new data centers online, there's a couple of things that our customers are really trying to solve, right? Obviously, there's heat challenges, right? We've got, chips going from maybe 100 watts to, 7, 8, maybe even 1.5 kilowatts, right, per chip. Big increases in power. The power density is increasing, so that's requiring people to manage heat really well. And so, Flex is a provider of liquid cooling solutions. So really spending a lot of time there working with our customers on those next gen designs as they start looking at racks that, a couple of years ago, a rack might have been, 20, 30 kilowatts. Now they're looking at racks in the, 200, 300. We've got one customer even looking at 1 megawatt racks. So lots of power density also going on in these data centers. But another challenge that's starting to crop up, especially in the area of GPUs, these GPUs are switching at a very fast pace. I mean, if you think about just, a normal switching, right? Even a switch in your home, right? When you turn on power in the morning, you're creating a power disturbance. Now imagine if you're switching that power on billions of times a second in a data center. And what we're seeing, in fact, one of our customers, they were deploying a 64 rack cluster of GPUs. And when they did that, they were starting to see somewhere in the neighborhood of a 1 megawatt peak. And this was all caused by these power disturbances, harmonics, right, in the data center power system itself. So Flex is working really closely with our customers, not only to help them build things, because we love doing that, right? But there's also a lot of challenges around power quality. In the specific area, we stepped out in front with a new technology. We call it the capacitor energy storage system. And what this does is it allows us to buffer those peaks within the rack. So what we've seen is, so in this particular case study that we did with this one customer, they were seeing these 1 megawatt peaks every couple of seconds. We've been able to reduce that to about 78 kilowatts. So tremendous change, right? And we're running into a situation where the utilities are not allowing these data centers to turn on loads like this because it'll cause havoc. I mean, one customer the other day told us that they will be causing power disturbances in a 200-mile radius around the data center that they were building if they didn't have a solution like ours. So there's all kinds of teething issues, right, as we start to deploy this much capacity and this much capability in these data centers. And I think our customers are the first to tell everybody that Flex is a great partner to be able to help them solve some of those challenges.
So you've heard it here that the next time you search for ChatGPT to give you a parody song based on your last email, that's what's causing your lights to flicker in the house. It's we can draw a straight line there. Bring this back to the manufacturing side. We're talking about what Flex is doing in Dallas and what some of the other companies are doing on switchgear, but it goes so far beyond it. As Matt mentioned, all these buildings are going up. So you have lots of steel, lots of mild steel and plain steels going up for those business, the actual buildings. You have aluminum for all the electrical conduits. And then several of the big steel makers have announced huge investments in electrical steel. So the need for the specialized steel to work within these transformers and the switchgear and things like that to handle the high electrical loads and to shield things properly. So it's a huge increase in manufacturing activity related to this thirst for more electricity. I would think we're having some problems getting Sara Jensen. Oh, it looks like we have Sara back now. And Sara, can you talk a little bit about within that manufacturing world, the electrification of tools? This is not a new trend. This has been going on for 20 plus years. But if you could talk a little bit about why so many of the newer plants going in are using electrical tools instead of the hydraulics and pneumatics that maybe had a different profile for power use.
Sure. Yeah, so there's been a lot of improvements over the years in those electric technologies. So that's helped to kind of increase their use. And with a lot of companies looking to see if there are technologies other than hydraulics and pneumatics that can provide a little more precision and reliability, as great as hydraulics and pneumatics are in many instances, there's also, a lot of maintenance issues associated with them. Hydraulics are going to leak at some point that can cause health issues or issues with your product. So there's a lot of companies that are looking to alternatives to those technologies, as well as, hydraulics, as great as it is, it can take all of the components necessary for a hydraulic system can take up a lot of space. Sometimes the same with pneumatics, whereas the electric technologies don't always require as much of a footprint. And so that can really help for, in some of these companies that are needing to be more careful with their space or adding in more machines and things. There's also a little bit of that trend of, you have a younger generation coming into these industries and, not as many are as familiar with hydraulics and pneumatics unless you've really gone into a fluid power focused course. They're really used to the electric technologies that provide a lot of precision and precise motion control and data collection. And, some of that is going on. That is happening in the fluid power space as well. But, the electric has a little bit more of an advantage at times with that. And so there's likely to be that generational factor as well going forward. But, that said, there's also still a lot of applications that do rely on hydraulics and pneumatics, and also a lot of just hybrid technologies, incorporating the electronic aspect as well as the fluid power aspect, because then you get kind of the best of both worlds of more precise control, but also the power density you may need or the more cost efficient benefit of pneumatics or its kind of speed and things of that sort. So.
Yeah, you and I had talked about this last week, and I mentioned that I was writing about an auto plant in Ohio back in, I think it was 2008, that they retooled the entire plant and pulled out all the hydraulics and pneumatics in the final assembly area in favor of electrified tools. And it wasn't an efficiency issue, it was computer controls. They wanted to be able to log every single turn of that torque wrench to make sure the exact right amount of force has been applied to every nut and bolt on every vehicle, because that traceability was very important for any kind of accident data later or quality control later. So that traceability was very important. Now, we're seeing some of that in hydraulics and pneumatics, but it's kind of built in with the electrics. So. Just to close things out, I wanted to go back to you, Nikki, because we originally were going to have one of your colleagues on here, Rod Walton, to talk about the microgrid side of things, which we discussed microgrids a little bit a couple weeks ago, but it plays a role here as well. There's a lot of code generation going on at these data centers, lots of complex power ranges. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on the microgrid side to support these data centers?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, microgrids are a really good way to help alleviate that capacity need and also to provide the resiliency that is needed on the grid. So we're seeing that, there's more than one reason to have a microgrid to power your data center or to power anything, right? For any energy need for a company. So but that data center growth is really helping drive that push to get more investment in microgrids, to maybe even consider them for that need. We're seeing some of the different parts of the country where that's going on. Texas is growing in data center capacity because those developers are beginning to consider energy as well as fiber optic access in their planning. And then Chevron actually recently announced the deal with Engine No. 1 and GE Vernova for gas turbine powered plants specific to data center and remote customers. So, but they're going to be considering that microgrids as well for that. So, and so there's a lot of different ways to go about building those microgrids, and they're using different fuels. So that's kind of something that's interesting for us to see too. They're considering small modular nuclear reactor. There's a lot of deals that those are going on. So there's a lot of interest in nuclear on the smaller scale for maybe helping with these for that need, and of course that can all be tied into a microgrid. Really any renewable source you could tie into a microgrid as long as you've got that controller or that as Chris was saying, the solutions to help alleviate power quality issues and things like that. So I don't know, I'm just kind of going on, but
no, well, I mean, your mention of Texas there, because Texas has such a strong alternative energy grid, which kind of surprises a lot of people given some of the politics of the situation. But Texas has has made huge investments in solar and wind over the past few years, and has a very large capacity for green energy. So a lot of companies, I've heard of this, a lot of companies going in with their data centers to Texas because they can feed it with alternative energies.
Yeah, I mean, Texas actually has a hydrogen-powered data center right now in Houston, run by ECL. And as Nikki was saying, the microgrid sort of become the glue because it plays so well with fuel cell technologies and other green technologies like hydrogen, and but then also natural gas. And natural gas is sort of linked with hydrogen, because obviously natural gas is not optimal for green energy, but it's a lot better than coal. And so just sort of, the electrification discussion, it's not optional, with the power demands of everything, data centers not the least, but also the onshoring of manufacturing and EVs and stuff. I mean, the electrification piece is, it's not like a nice to have. It's like it's going to be necessary, these investments in clean energy and, energy storage solutions like microgrids to make up that gap of the power demand that we began the discussion on, because the power demands are just so staggering, what they're being projected, that that's why we're going to need this mosaic of energy solutions. And a lot of them are happening in Texas for sure.
Yeah, utilities are actually kind of excited because just a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, they were talking about the utility death spiral, and they were worried with the energy efficiency and things like that, that, you know, utilities were going to almost cease to exist or be a smaller version of what they were. And now they're talking about good loads and things like that. So, but granted, it's not going to be central from the utility. It's going to be a lot of this distributed energy resources. Utilities are putting some of those in, but also they'll be needing to work with private companies, you know, and other entities to tie that into the grid or not, you know. And that's the thing about a microgrid, which is really interesting, is, you know, we've debated on what the actual definition of a microgrid is, and you know, really what I've seen and what I've understood is it's something that can be islanded, so it could provide your power without having to be tied into the grid, you know, or it could be tied into the grid. So that's kind of interesting too.
Yeah, Nikki, just one last point on that. You know, it is the glue that allows us to, you know, address the power situation maybe from a different point, right? You've got, you know, right now, most of these data centers are backed up by diesel gensets. We've got to figure out a way, you know, to start phasing them out and look at other sources of energy, not only alternative sources, but, you know, just even battery backup as an alternative. And, you know, with the cost of lithium ion batteries coming down, it's starting to become a potential reality. I mean, I can tell you from my own personal experience, we, you know, first of all, Flex makes solar inverters. We make solar inverters in South Carolina and Texas. And I have the ones that are built in Texas at my house. During Hurricane Milton, it was fantastic. We lost power for 5 days, but we were up and ready to go. We also had electric vehicles, so nobody else was able to get fuel around Tampa. And we were able to drive around with no issue, powered from the solar panels. I mean, that's the way a data center of the future should work.
Yes.
And we've got to figure out all of these different ingredients to make that happen.
You know, I can say that back in the 80s, Hurricane Alicia hit Houston when I was growing up, and we were the only house in the neighborhood that had gas power. So we were the only one. We were cooking breakfast for the entire neighborhood. Everyone was bringing over the food that was spoiling, and we're cooking in our kitchen. So that was a great memory.
Everybody was plugging their cell phones into my electric truck. Pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for joining us here. It is a fantastic discussion. I'd like to thank all of our guests. We have Sara Jensen, who had to drop off with Power and Motion. Chris, you're president. What is the division there within Flex?
Embedded in Critical Power.
Embedded in Critical Power. Thank you so much for joining us on such a short notice, Chris. Thank you, Matt Vincent, for joining us from Data Center Frontier, and Nikki Chandler, who again was a last-minute replacement due to an ailing Rod Walton. I hope you're feeling better soon, Rod. And Nikki, always great to have you join us for these sorts of talks.
Thank you.
Have a
Thanks,
great
everybody.
afternoon, everyone, and enjoy Production Pulse. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with our next session.